I am Jim Sheets, and we've been here in Benzie County for 53 and a half years. I was born August the 4th in 1937. From the age of 4 until the age of 17, that's where I lived, was in Marion. Then in January of 1958, I went into the Army. And so at that time that we were having a little bit of a depression, and I could see that people were getting laid off at the plant, and like almost every boy that graduated with me in high school went into the service. And I got back in 1960, and while I'd been in the service, I had been fortunate enough to take some classes. Sometimes I'd been close enough to a university that I could take some classes or whatever, but I decided that I was going to go back to school when I got out of the service. The next year, 67, I started interviewing for teaching jobs. My brother and my dad and I were going to go fishing up in the UP, and so I came up here, and I really wasn't dressed for an interview. But Bob Lone was the superintendent at that time, and we hit it off, and he offered me a contract, and Merrill and I were ready to sign right then, but he said, well, why don't you think about it over the weekend, because it was Memorial Day weekend, and let him know next week. Let's see, in the first year that I was here, I taught U.S. history and world history. Plus I coached varsity baseball, JV football, and I was the junior class advisor.
So what was it like being a teacher in the 60s?
Whoa! It was different. So I was 30 years of age when I started teaching. And the Vietnam War was really going on. And I was, to be honestly truthful, Merrill and I we kind of figured that I was going to get called back into the service. Because I had the MOS that I carried, which is your military occupational status, was one that I figured that I would get called back. And but for some reason or not, I wasn't. When we talk about the ripple effect, like you're talking about, there are people that touch your life, and it isn't like they hit you like a sledgehammer or anything like that, but they have an impact on you. It may be from afar, it may be that it's somebody you look at and you say, now that's the life that I'd kind of like to live. Or it's somebody that takes you under their wing and they help you. There are people that have an influence on you. And I think there was a fellow by the name of Ralph McCrimmon that was a history teacher that I had. And I admired that man. When you're exposed to many people, you pick this, you don't even realize it, but you pick out a particular characteristic of somebody and you kind of add it to yourself. And I don't know why, but I mean, that's just the way it works. I think that the biggest thing that I could say, and when I was first here, my first year, in Bill Lynch, who was a Hall of Fame basketball coach from Benzie, he and I were coaching JV football together. And our philosophies were so very similar. And we kind of made an agreement, a pact among us that we would always treat every kid as if they were our own. That was some of the characteristics of my mentors, was they took everybody at face value. I think probably was the fact that compared to most people, I'd had a lot of varied experiences. When I became part of this community, every summer I did something, tried to do something different. And so I got to know where you lived, where that person lived, where this person lived, because I was out in the community, whether working or whatever it was, and I knew almost where every kid that I had in class lived, or every kid that I came in contact with, where they lived. I got to know their parents. I just thought that was part of the job. Yeah, that's true. Before Halloween, and there used to be some pretty lively things that happened around this area on Halloween. There were some towns honor that you didn't go through. Yes, I would. I'd put my phone number on and I'd say, okay, if you get in trouble and it's bad enough that you don't want to call your folks, you can call me and I'll come and bail you out. I said, the only thing is I put a limit of 50 miles on it. I only go out 50 miles to do that. But I broke that one time because I had to go to Ludington and bail somebody out. But yeah, I did. Yeah. I chose not to make a big point of things in a classroom, but that person and I would have a talk, and we would get it ironed out.
How did teaching high schoolers impact the community they belong to?
Take a look around. See how many own businesses in this area. See how many are just good, solid citizens.
What is one thing you think all teachers should have?
I think it can be summed up in one word of empathy. Empathy.